Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Happy weekend. If you're in a part of the world where today is the weekend, which I think most places have Saturday weekends. Anyway, so I am here to do a live session. This week I'm going to be talking about Islamic etiquette in particular regard to helping new converts adjust to what is proper Islamic etiquette. So it's kind of a broad topic. So I've kind of parsed it down to a couple different sections, and we'll be going through those as I've written down on my notepad. So let's get started. Now, actually, before we get started, I do have one request, and that is my husband's uncle died this week. He's a very kind, very sweet man. And if everyone could make dua that Allah will forgive him for any wrongdoing and accept him in Jannah, I would appreciate that. He was a very, very nice, kind man, and one of my husband's only relatives in this country. So if everyone could make dua for him, I would appreciate that. Now, as for our topic today, excuse me, I'm sorry. So, etiquette for new Muslims can be a very tricky thing to navigate. When you first become Muslim, a lot of times it's really overwhelming. You're bombarded with all this information from really well-meaning people who truly, I think for the majority of them at least, they truly want to make Islam a good experience for you. Which is funny because I don't think it's very good Islamic etiquette to bombard people with new information upon becoming Muslim. I mean, remember that in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, the Quran was revealed over many years. So expecting a new Muslim to adapt everything right away is a little bit absurd. So already I'm going to come to the first point of just for people who have been Muslim a long time or who were raised Muslim, for us, let's try and keep in mind that little piece of Islamic etiquette where we shouldn't really be overwhelming, newcomers to our faith with, all this, do this, don't do this, that's haram, you have to do this, etc., etc., etc. So that little piece of advice is for those of us like myself. I've been Muslim for 10 years now, alhamdulillah, on February 6th. And for those of us who were raised Muslim. So that's the piece of my video that's for us. For new Muslims, to kind of go back to what this is actually about, it's really difficult not only to be facing such a huge influx of information, but trying to decipher what is actually Islam. And I know for me, as a new Muslim, I just trusted what everyone else said around me. I was young, I was 19, and I didn't have a lot of experience with the Muslim community. And I do think that it's not across the board, but it's fairly common with new Muslims, unless you happen to be fortunate enough to have a lot of Muslim friends, that you kind of take for granted that the Muslims you're interacting with are going to be giving you correct information about Islam and not about Pakistani culture or Egyptian culture or whatever. So that what I'm getting to here is not only is it a challenge to be receiving so much new information when you become a new Muslim, but also trying to figure out, or even having it on your radar, that not all of the information is good information. So that's what I want to address here. This is a topic that I feel is really important to talk about. So I did make a couple quick lists about what are some things that you might learn that are Islamic and what are some things that are cultural. If anyone wants to drop in the comments some points of Islamic etiquette, but before you do, if you're gonna do that, I want you to do a quick Google search and see if you can find Quran or Hadith to back it up, because that's really, like, I like having people participate in the comments, but I'm really trying to avoid people putting forth cultural information as Islamic. And again, and I don't want to get too far into this. I do think that people do it with the best of intentions. And I think a lot of people don't realize that their cultural practices aren't actually Islamic. They're cultural. And so we're not looking at like a bunch of really devious, bad people who are trying to convert everyone to, you know, Malaysian and instead of Islam. That's silly. I think very few people have any sort of malicious intent in their interactions towards new Muslims. But anyway, so if you have any ideas of points of Islamic etiquette, drop them in the comments, but do just make sure that you know that they're actually grounded in Islam in a firm way and not in a vague, like, oh yeah, if you squint at the verse like this, you can kind of see how it would mean that, you know, like an actual real way. So here's my really quick list. So a few just really simple etiquette things that new Muslims might learn about, might think like, is that real? Here are some things that are that have grounding in Islam, in the religion of Islam. So avoiding shaking hands with the opposite sex, that's Islamic. We don't want to have physical contact with the opposite sex unless they're a close relative or spouse. Eating with the right hand, that's also something grounded in Islam. Avoiding eating with the left hand. You want to try and eat with your right hand. I'm left-handed. I'm actually I don't want to call myself ambidextrous because I feel like that implies I can do things equally with both hands. But when it comes to things I do naturally, I naturally write and eat with my left hand, and everything else I do right-handed. Like, I don't really play baseball, but if I did, I would hit right-handed. Just interesting tidbit about myself. So that's something that's difficult for me. Also, I'm sorry, this is gonna seem like a no-brainer to a lot of Muslims, but after you use the toilet, cleaning yourself with water, that's also something that's grounded in Islam, in cleanliness. Saying salams to each other, that's also Islamic. It's actually considered a right of Muslims to, of your fellow Muslims to have, when you say salam, for you to return it to them. Also referring to each other as brothers and sisters, that's also something that's based in this deen. Deen, if there are new Muslims watching, is just the Arabic word for religion. Because we are all brothers and sisters in this faith, that's something that the Prophet ﷺ said. It is something that's supposed to be an equalizer, like the king is still your brother in Islam, and the poorest, beggar is also your brother. It's supposed to be an equalizer, which is something that I really love in this faith. Then I have a quick little list of some cultural practices. And this one might be easier if anyone is watching and you're aware of some cultural practices around etiquette. I'm speaking specifically about etiquette, etiquette that people sometimes pass off as being Islamic. Drop them in the comments. So a few cultural practices that aren't necessarily Islamic. Separation of sexes at all times. That's not something that is grounded in Islam. It's something that I don't know when historically it started, but it's really like super trendy right now, or so it would seem, that women and men are apart at all times, and that's silly, and it's not Islamic. It's cultural. I've heard some people say that you should not write with your left hand. That is not Islamic. That's something that the Catholics did in the 60s. That's not something that we do. There's no need to stop your child from writing with his or her left hand if that's what they do. That is a cultural thing. It's eating with your left hand that you want to avoid, not writing. A lot of cultures do this thing where after they read the Quran or when they're picking it up or touching it or whatever, they kiss it. That's also cultural. That's not something necessary in Islam. Please remember that the Quran was not compiled as a book in the time of the Prophet ﷺ. So any rituals around the Quran as a book are purely cultural or traditional, and they're not Islamic. Okay. Kissing the hands of elders, that's also something that I've seen people do. That's also a cultural practice. It's supposed to show respect. That's not something that you have to do Islamically. Also referring to elders as aunt and uncle. It is not incorrect to refer to elders as brother and sister. It doesn't matter how old or young you are. That's like I said, this is an equalizer. We're all brothers and sisters in Islam. And this one I actually had to Google for myself to confirm. Removing shoes inside the house. The Muslims who helped me transition into Islam, they're from India, and they always remove their shoes inside the house. My husband's Iraqi family does not necessarily always do that. So that's a cultural practice, not necessarily Islamic. Now, I do want to cut in here a little bit. First of all, to say salam to everyone who's joining late. And good morning to those of us on this side of the world. I do also want to add this caveat, because sometimes when we're talking about cultural practices, I mean, I want to be really careful about how I say this. So a lot of times when we're talking about cultural practices, they should, again, someone said the pursing is haram. I'm not sure what that is. If you could explain what that means. Anyway, it is, not correct to be putting forward these cultural practices as being necessary in Islam. That's not the way that it should be presented. However, a lot of times when people talk about these cultural practices from the outside, so like me, I'm a convert, and sometimes when converts, get together, we're like, oh, they told me that blah, blah, blah was Islamic, and it's not. And it is really frustrating, and sometimes people not wrongly get angry about all these things that they were wrongly told are Islamic. So, but I think it's also important for us converts to understand, not only, again, do a lot of these things come from a good place, not always, but a lot of times, but also try to keep in mind that a lot of these cultural practices aren't necessarily bad practices. Just because they aren't rooted in Quran and Sunnah doesn't mean that they're bad. So take a look at the reasoning behind these different practices. When we're talking about kissing the hands of elders or referring to elders as aunt and uncle, why do people do that? It's to show respect for elderly people, and there's nothing wrong with that. Do you have to do it? No. Should you be made to feel that it's required? No. Is it wrong to do? Also no. When I go to my husband's country, piercing. That's also not true. Sorry, pursing. I'm gonna actually, I don't like to do this. I'm gonna interrupt myself and address what this person is saying. They're saying that the piercing in my nose is haram in Islam. That's not true. If you have a problem with the way that I look or the way that I'm dressed, I suggest you exit this video because my appearance is not up for anyone to comment on. If you have some proof that my nose piercing is haram in Islam, go ahead and provide it, but you won't find it because it's not. Thank you. All right, so going back to what I was saying. Looking at these practices and trying to understand the reasoning behind it, I'm also going to talk about removing shoes in the house. This is something that I lived in Canada for a few years, and most Canadians do this. They remove their shoes in the house. And there's this sort of undertone of like, I don't know if you all can hear my kids in the background. Like ribbing Americans, sort of. So I was the American, among a bunch of Canadians, obviously, and they're like, so they would, ask me, why do you do this? And the question is, why do Americans leave their shoes on in the house? It's disgusting. It's dirty. There's dog poop outside. What if you brought diseases in the house, et cetera, which is a tad dramatic, but also not true. So, I'm sorry, it's not false. It is true scientifically. I mean, look, you're walking outside, you don't know what's out there, you wear your shoes in the house. So anyway, my point is, and I'm kind of dragging this on, is removing shoes in the house is a form of keeping your house clean, is cleanliness, and that's not bad. It's not bad to engage in these practices. So again, like the trick is deciphering between what is Islamic and what is cultural, but also trying to understand the reasoning behind some of these cultural practices. And there's nothing wrong with adopting some of them. For the most part, I don't wear my shoes in the house. I certainly don't wear my shoes on my carpet. I have hardwood floors in my house, so it's pretty easy to clean, but upstairs is all carpet. Okay. Again, Sufyan, please give proof if you're going to make those claims. Okay, so I have a couple of questions that I'm going to address. If anyone has any questions about what I've said so far, drop them in the comments. I may not be able to address them during the live session. I know last time I did a live session, I was so distracted by the comments, I hardly talked. I was just like reading the whole time. So but I'll look at the comments afterwards and reply to them. So I've got a couple of questions that I believe come from recent converts, so I would definitely want to address these. I don't know if you guys can hear this. My kids are being wild in the background. So I'm paraphrasing the questions. One of them was, what social skills can be difficult for converts to adopt? This is really dependent on the person. For me, handshaking, not shaking hands of the opposite sex, is really difficult for me to, for me to get used to. Oh my gosh, they're relentless, my kids. It's really like, it can be considered rude in this culture, in Western culture, to refuse to shake someone's hand. It's seen as a social slight. As a matter of fact, like, if you want to show someone that you don't like them, you disapprove of them, something like that, you refuse to shake their hand. So that is something that's really difficult for me to adjust to. And honestly, I've not completely adjusted. A lot of times you're in social situations, especially when you grew up in this culture, someone extends their hand to you. Go ahead. You don't even think about it. You just extend your hand and shake it without even thinking. Doesn't make it right, but it's just something that's really, it's almost a reflex that's difficult to suppress. If you grew up in a culture where it's not that common, or it's very common to refuse to shake someone's hand, it's a lot easier to do. I was just listening to, it doesn't matter, but if you knew me in real life, you'd know that I interject and every single conversation was, I was just listening to a podcast and then I learned this, so I'm going to not do that here. So anyway, it really depends on you as a person. Again, for Western Muslims, I'm going to guess that that's going to be a really big one. Also and I don't really like to say this, and I'll explain why. Sufyan, I speak French. It's okay. Now I've lost my train of thought. See, this is what I do when I look at the comments. Oh yeah, so for me, another one was the way that people separate the sexes all the time. Which again is more of a cultural practice than Islamic, except for in certain situations. But when you're in someone else's house, when you're the guest, you have to go along with what they do. You can't be like, oh no, separating the sexes is not Islamic, and so I'm not going to do it. I'm just going to go hang out with the bros or whatever. You know, you have to follow the rules of the person's house where you're a guest. But I'm also like not super comfortable in unfamiliar social situations. So when I go somewhere, I like to have my husband with me. And if I'm in a place where I need to separate from him, it's like, now who do I cling to? Now who do I pretend that I need to be talking to when someone else tries to talk to me? But again, that's just a personal thing. Another person said that they feel awkward around born Muslims, and what to do with that. And I'm going to go ahead and venture that it's not so much awkwardness around born Muslims, but awkwardness around people from another culture. And I don't think this is coming from like a xenophobic place, but imagine like, so I just mentioned to one of the people commenting, I speak French. The reason I do is because when I was 17, I spent a year abroad in France. It's a Western culture. It's a culture that's, reasonably similar to the one I'm familiar with, but it still felt awkward to me. I wasn't part of the language. I didn't know the etiquette. So I think that the reason that you might feel awkward around born Muslims is more because of the cultural divide. And of course you want to make friends with Muslims and participate in Islamic culture and familiarize yourself with different cultural customs because it is going to be a part of your life as a Muslim. But also, it's natural for humans to want to be in groups where they're comfortable. Excuse me. I'm really sorry. So if you're a convert, I really encourage you to try and seek out other converts, to try and, that's something that can really be strengthening for your Islam. Find other people who know similar struggles that you've experienced as well. And, bond with those people. I don't think you should close yourself off from people who have been born Muslim, but I think it's really important to have a strong base of friends or contacts who are also converts and understand and can sympathize. And also converts who have been Muslim for a long time, like me, and, maybe you're a new Muslim and you're like, oh, yeah, Sister so-and-so told me I have to stop writing with my left hand. And then, you meet someone who's been a convert for 10 years like me, and I'll be like, no, and that's not true. So making friends with converts can kind of help you wade through those waters a little bit. And then the last comment I love, and I think that all Muslims across all cultures will appreciate this. So the question is paraphrased: why do Muslims feed me so much? Isn't that lovely? It was, I don't have the question up in front of me right now, but it was something along the lines of like, I know Muslims are really generous, but why do they want me to eat so much? And how do I tell them I'm full? Which is so sweet. And, alhamdulillah, that Muslims have that reputation. It's true. It's absolutely true. I've interacted with Muslims from a lot of different cultures, and it is true. I verify this. from my Indian neighbors when I first became Muslim, to the Omanis whose house I visited when I was living in Oman, to my husband's Iraqi family. They all want to feed you, and it's a lovely reputation for Muslims to have. But it is hard to say no, and honestly, there's no real way that you can do it that's gonna make it easy. There's not. So you're just gonna have to insist. What makes it confusing is there are some cultures where you're expected to say no a certain amount of times because it's otherwise considered impolite. Don't let yourself get bogged down in that. You are responsible for your own cultural knowledge, and you can go into any situation with that. It's going to feel awkward. You're not going to get away from having awkward social situations. You're also probably not going to get away with having a few days of your life feeling really bloated because of all the food. In any case, I'm sorry I don't have an easy answer for you other than just insist that you're full, or let them give you just a little more, or insist on filling your own plate, or like only one more piece of whatever delicious food they're really trying to get you to eat. I just thought that was such a lovely question. Unfortunately, not one with a good answer, so I can't help you there. I'm just going to take a quick look here because I'm almost at the end of my session, so I'm going to scroll through the comments. I saw a few running past that I wanted to comment on. Yes, so one person was addressing, this is Sahil Malik, addressing what I said about shaking hands. We live to praise Allah. Let's forget about what society thinks, etc., etc. Yes, that is true. Our purpose is to praise Allah and do what we can to make Allah happy and not care so much about other people. That's all well and good in theory. But do you come from a culture where it's absolutely expected for you to shake someone's hand as a show of basic social, like the most basic social building block almost? Do you come from a culture where that is expected? Whatever, do your best to please Allah, and don't worry about anyone else. That's not really helpful, and it's not really real. Something is going on with my connection, so I'm sorry if it's kind of cutting in and out, but hopefully it straightens out. My laptop is connected just fine. Let me just check something really quick. Okay. And someone actually already replied to what I said, or with what I said. So I just want to kind of drive that home. Imagine you're coming from a culture where you refer to your elders as aunt and uncle. And that's not necessary in Islam. And what if someone, okay, it's not quite the same, this isn't an apples to apples comparison, but what if someone came to you saying, why do you do that? We're all supposed to be equals in Islam. Who cares about what other people think? Just please Allah. Don't call them uncle and aunt, call them brother and sister, or call them by their name, or whatever it is. It's only Allah we care about, but you can't do that because it's so ingrained in you to show a certain level of respect to elders that it's not a direct comparison. Again, my connection went out, which is irritating. So I guess I started off with a little bit of a piece of advice for those of us who are either born into Islam, or who have been converts for a long time, or who have been Muslim for a long time. And I'm going to end it with one more message for those of us who have been, again, Muslim for a long time, or who are raised Muslim. and that is, let's all try to do our best to show compassion. Okay, sorry. I just can't let these things go. Sahil, like I said, it's not an apples to apples comparison. It's not exactly the same. My point is, you can't lecture someone about dropping their culture if it's something that's so ingrained. You can't just, it's really easy to sit on your high horse and be like, oh, well, you know, all we care about is pleasing Allah, so just stop. You know, it's easy to do that. I'm not saying that it's cool to shake hands with the opposite sex. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying you can't just expect people to be like, oh, well, it's just culture, I'll just leave it. No more than you could leave your culture aside. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying it's okay. Once again, it's not a perfect comparison, but I'm doing a live session. I have to come up with stuff on the fly. So that's all. And this is going to go very nicely into my conclusion, which is, for those of us who've been Muslim for a long time or who were raised in Islam, let us try our very best to be compassionate towards people who are still adjusting to this faith. Something I hear from Muslims a lot that is really hateful and terrible thing to say is, well, if someone is truly Muslim for their love of Islam, then they won't leave Islam no matter what. But that's not true. That's not true. People push converts away from Islam at an alarming rate. We love to say how often people convert to Islam, but how many of those people stay? The fact that I converted to Islam and stayed for 10 years and still going strong, I'm more of I'm in the minority. I don't know if that's statistically true, but it's just so common for people to be pushed away from Islam because of these hateful, hurtful, pushy ways that Muslims have. So let's try to be compassionate and loving and accepting and give guidance in a helpful way, not saying like, oh, well, you know, just stop. You know it's a wrong thing. Allah, the most pious generation we've known, Allah had the Quran revealed over years at a time. Years. So let's us remember that and treat newcomers with compassion. For those of you who are commenting that my video or the sound isn't going, I'm sorry, I'm having some sort of connection issues, but I'm gonna end this. I've gone over my time. So you can stop commenting sound. The recording should be good, inshallah. So, assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you so much for listening.